super lost in the tree.
And how well they can.
That's
Yeah.
You're doing it, Julie. Your boss is a Jennifer.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
No.
Nice to see you all this morning. First of all, thank you for making it out this morning on what is kind of a gloomy and gray day. I think is it January 6th? Is this known as the most unhappy day of the year? It's sometime in January, isn't it? Where it's like the least happy day. So thanks for being here. This makes it a little less unhappy for me and hopefully for you too. So let's get started for today. For those of you that have had a course with me before, you probably recognize why it's on a Zoom meeting. So I found this to be a very effective strategy. I'm going to live stream all the lectures and then record them to the cloud afterwards. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But what that means is that if you're unable to attend a class in person, you can watch live on Zoom. It's no substitute. It's always better to be here because you're here. You're in the right place and you're thinking about stuff. And I personally enjoy lecturing to a larger classroom rather than a smaller classroom. But I also understand that sometimes the bus doesn't work. Sometimes you might be sick, or you might even not be here in town for whatever reason. You can still attend the lectures. I'll do my best to remember to record them from the beginning to the end, which also means that sometime later today, I'll be able to put the recordings on the OWL site and also on YouTube so that you can watch them afterwards, which means that you can then refer back to them. And maybe you don't need to worry about taking detailed notes for everything I say. You can focus on some of the interesting things or the bigger concept. You can do whatever you like. All of the options will be there. So let's get started with the actual class today. I'm sort of stalling a bit because I know that there's a few people probably still making their way in. I had to write down I think I've been in this classroom before, but it was a couple of years ago. So I always have to write down, where am I going to be? And then carry this little Post-it note stuck to my coffee mug to remember, where am I? So here we are. I think we're all in the right place. Oh, you are here for psychology of thinking, correct? Okay, good, because we're all then in this place. So let me bring up slides for today, and then we're going to do a few things. It's a normal first course type thing. So we'll spend maybe the first half an hour going through some ground rules, talking about how the course is going to run, going through the course outline a little bit, but it's up there on Brightspace, so you can read most of the stuff. We're not going to go through the details, just the really important stuff, like when quizzes are going to be, when the exam is going to be, how much they're going to be worth, that kind of stuff. And then the rest of the course class today will primarily be content. Okay, so if I do this, oh, wait a minute. I think I got to share my screen. So those of you that, I think there might be one or two people joining, I think I've actually got to share this. So we'll share the whole screen. Okay, there we go. And now let me hide my floating meeting. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to bother with that because we're going to be going back and forth. So I think this is the most important course that you're going to take at university. A few of you I recognize from 2135 a few years ago. I think I also claimed that cognitive psychology was the most important course you're going to take. This is actually the most important course you're going to take. Hands down, of all the courses you've taken, this will be the most important course that you're going to take at Western over the course of your 4 or 5 years that you're here. Why do I think that? Well, let's get started with a little bit of question and answer. You're 3rd and 4th year students, correct? Is anybody a 2nd year student? That's good, because technically you would have to have more prerequisites to get into the course. Is anybody a 5th year student or beyond? Okay, we'll have a little bit of chance to talk about those things. So you're 3rd and 4th year. Many of you are probably thinking about what to do next when you're finished with university. Who's got a plan? Does anybody have a plan? What's your plan?
Getting into counseling psychology.
Getting into counseling psychology. So you're applying or will be applying to graduate school. And that's going to require, of course, multiple applications, right? So how many of you are also applying to a graduate or a professional program? there's a lot of the decisions that you need to make just to get started, right? You need to decide what kind of programs you want to apply to. You need to decide where you're going to live. You need to decide, is this a program that I'm going to like? Am I going to get into the best school that I can in a place that I like? Am I going to be doing the kind of research that I want to do? So you've probably done a lot of research on graduate and professional programs, right? You can't just apply everywhere. Well, you could, but what's the downside of applying everywhere? It's about $150 an application, isn't it? So it starts to add up. So you've got a financial decision to make. So already you're doing a lot of future thinking. You're doing a lot of problem solving. You're doing a lot of decision making, trying to weigh some alternatives and trying to decide what's best for you. And that's just to get you started. How many of you are interested in law school or potentially legal work? So again, you're going to have the same application process, but once you become a lawyer, whether it's working in corporate law, financial law, trial law, criminal law, you're going to be making a lot of arguments, right? You're going to need to learn to think on your feet. You're going to have to be putting in long hours, billing hours for clients. All of that involves the things that we're going to be talking about in this course. Because we're going to be talking about how to use your memory effectively. We're going to be talking about how to solve problems effectively, how to think quickly on your feet, but also how to think deliberately and more slowly, and how to go back and reevaluate. These are all really important life skills, and understanding how the mind works is one of the most important things you can take from university. Now, again, you got to hype your own course, right? So I got to hype my course a little bit, but I think this happens to be true. This isn't just hype. I think this is the most important course you're going to take at university because it's interesting content. It's interesting to learn about the mind, I think. That's why I study it. That's why I've been studying it for 30 years. It's interesting to learn about the brain. It's interesting to learn about human behavior. But in a course like this, you can also learn about things that you can apply to make better decisions, to be more effective, to be easier on yourself when you make less effective decisions. Because what is it, January 6th already? How many of you can count on more than one hand the number of bad decisions you've already made this year? I've made a few. I've had some frustrations. Everybody has had some frustrations. There are things I'd like to have done better already, and it's only January 6th. And I'm sure you're probably in the same boat. There are probably things you've thought you'd like to do a little bit better. One of the things we're going to talk about in this class is all the ways in which your mind and brain let you down because of the way it's designed. Good thinking and a brain and a mind that are working effectively often give you the wrong answer. Mostly, you get the right decision, you make the right behaviors, but a lot of times you don't. And so one of the things we'll talk about is how sometimes that's just a natural outgrowth of how the brain and mind work. So of course, you're going to make some bad decisions sometimes. And there's often reasons why those bad decisions were made. Sometimes they were made in good faith. You made decisions with the best information you had at the time, and it turned out that you didn't have all the information, and the decision turned out to not be the best one you could have made in the long run. So be easier on yourself. That's one of the other things we're going to learn in this class, is how to be a little bit easier on yourself when things don't go as planned. So reflect back on this every so often in this course, whether or not you can learn some of these things to make your life a little bit more effective and a little better. So here's what we're going to do. The first half of the class, this is a schedule for how we're going to run things for the most part. And in today's class, we're going to do a little bit of, as I said, a little bit of groundwork rules here. And let me make sure okay, this appears to be working. That's good. It's a 3-hour lecture. That's kind of a long time. That's the amount of time it would take you to drive from here to Pearson Airport and halfway back. That's a long time. Can you imagine driving in the car to Pearson Airport, turning around, coming halfway back and listening to the same person talking? That's this class. You're listening to me talking the whole way to Pearson Airport and back. So we're going to try to make it interesting, but we also have to take breaks. I don't know about you, but when I drive to Pearson Airport or drive to Toronto, I usually like to take at least one break because it can be kind of a long break. Or if you're like me and you'd like to drink a lot of coffee in the morning, you got to take a break somewhere along the line. So we'll take a break at around 10:45. That can vary depending on how things are going. If we're a little bit ahead, we might break a little bit earlier if we want to come to a natural break point. And most of the classes have a natural break point around that halfway through point. And we'll take about a 15-minute break if we can. And then we'll pick up for the last half of class, which will be about an hour. These things are flexible, but that's sort of how things are going to run. If you're here for the first half, it's always good to stay for the second half. But if for some reason you're unable to make one half, you can always join. Doesn't matter to me. And remember, these things are being recorded, so you can catch up on stuff that you've missed pretty easily. I do have office hours. I changed the time of my office hours right after I posted these slides. My office hours are going to be from 2 to 3. So let me update that. And I think that is actually on the course outline now. So trying to work some things out. I'll talk about my office hours. Those can be in person. They can also be on a Zoom link. So if you happen to be off campus, or if the weather's bad, or if you just don't feel like coming in, or if you're somewhere else, I can also be met on Zoom. So typically what happens if I've got office hours available, it's first come, first serve. You can ask any particular questions about the class or other questions about psychology and planning for the future. I'm available for all of that. Usually first come, first serve for at least that hour. I'll have the Zoom link open, and you can also come to my door. If you access the Zoom link and it says that I haven't let you in yet, it's probably because I'm talking to somebody else. And then I'll just let you know when you can join. Okay, so today we're going to just do some introductions, review the course outline, and then introductory material will begin before the break, take a little bit of a break, and then come back and talk about some more introductory material. So this is me. I guess I don't really need a picture of myself because I'm here, but it works really well if I got the recorded lecture afterwards. I'm in the psychology department. I've been here since 2003, so it's been a long time I've been at Western. Basically, my entire academic life has been here at Western. I've been stuck in this town for over 20 years now. How many years is anybody here? Londoners? A long time to be stuck in this town. I'm a member of the Western Institute for Neuroscience, a member of the Brain and Mind Center. I'm also currently the undergraduate chair for the Department of Psychology, so that oversees the curriculum, makes a lot of decisions about how things are run, and usually approves new courses, that kind of stuff. So oftentimes you may see email from me or signatures from me about other things. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is a beautiful city. Has anybody been to Pittsburgh or from Pittsburgh or been through Pittsburgh? It is really a beautiful city. And I do miss it. I haven't been back to the US for a while, but I have a lot of love for the city of Pittsburgh still. I grew up as a Pirates fan, which, if you're a baseball fan, Pirates have not done well for many years. And as a Steelers fan, and they do well for a while. Bachelor's degree. So I got my bachelor's degree in psychology at a place called Hiram College, which is in northeastern Ohio. Northeastern Ohio is kind of just like southern Ontario. It's the same geography, gets the same lousy weather. It's a similar vibe. Hiram College is a really small school, about 1,000 students old. And there's a lot of small schools like that in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania. The only connection, you can see it on the map right here, the only connection between Hiram College and London, Ontario, besides being almost exactly in line, is that Hiram College has black squirrels that were descended from black squirrels that were captured in Victoria Park in London in the 1960s, brought back to Kent State University illegally, by the way, and then they were released and took over some of the gray squirrels, which were a little bit smaller. So the black squirrels that I experienced in Hiram, they were the same genetic strain. They were offsprings of those black squirrels in London. I didn't know that until much later. I got a master's degree at Bucknell University, which is in the center of the state of Pennsylvania. My PhD was in 2000. So I lived in Buffalo for a few years. My wife's also from Buffalo, and that's where my Bills fandom began and continues to this day. I was a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign at the Beckman Institute, which is an interdisciplinary research institute. And then in 2003, I've been at Western. So that's my life story, my academic story. I run a research lab in the Department of Psychology. So I'm a cognitive psychologist. I do cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience. A little bit of collaborative work sometimes with people in Faculty of Medicine and Ivy Business. But my lab and my group are located, let me see if I can get the little pointer here, at the Western Interdisciplinary Research Building, the WIRB building, which is this sort of soulless and charmless building that's right across from the biotron and chemistry, and you can see visual arts here, but you sort of know where that is. If you're coming to my office hours, that's where I'll be on the 5th floor. And this is my current research group for the year. So I've got 3 grad students, a visiting grad student, a postdoc, and a bunch of undergraduates who are doing either honors thesis work or independent study work. And that's pretty much how it works. If you want to find out a little bit more about my research, you can always visit my research website. But enough about me. Tell me about yourself now. So you can find this link on the slides if you have your device, or you can take a QR code picture and answer some of these questions. So a couple of quick questions. I just want to know about the demographics of this course, this particular group of students that I'm teaching this year. So see if you can find it either on your device or on your laptop. The link is right there. It takes you to the same survey. And I'll pause for a minute while we look at some of the answers afterwards. If you're still answering, just take your time. There's no rush here. I've built in plenty of time for these types of things. I can wait a minute if it's. I'll wait just another minute. I still hear some people working on it, so that's fine. In the meantime, I'm distracting myself with that enormous pile of water bottles and cups and lost and found over there. What is going on? Has that been there since last year, I wonder? Let's take a look at some of the answers. If you're still going, it's just update things live. So just keep on going here. Plus, I can always look at them afterwards because some of these were useful for me to sort of plan some things. But let's go ahead and look at some of the answers. And again, keep going while you do here. So let's, okay, so I want to make this a little bit bigger here. Let's move myself out of the way. And let's look at some of these answers here. So first off, I'll make this bigger here. That's not going to help. Let's move this out of the way. There we go. So what's your current program? Fortunately, most of us are in the sort of in the right place. Most of you are psychology honors, psychology majors. A couple of other programs, some folks from other programs, one from Huron College, Western other program, other, which would be, I guess, anything that wasn't captured in any of the other ones. So you're mostly psychology students, which is kind of what I expect from year to year. And most of you, as we determined, were third, fourth, or other. So why did you decide to study psychology? So here's where I might want to look at some more details. So you've been drawn towards the social sciences. You want to do a postgrad master's. You enjoy psychology. It seemed interesting. Interest and lower course load. Well, that makes sense. I can get behind that. It appealed to me. I was interested after taking first year classes. I live in London, wanted to learn more about how people think. It's a good school field of psychology. What was the question? Was the question, how did you decide to study psychology at Western? So it could be both. I like the campus, wanted a fresh start. Let's look at some others. Ivy, you want to help people someday. Best school, best program. Not sure, to be honest, but I like it. Hey, look, that is honest. I'm glad that somebody was being honest there. Always interested in psych, live in London. First year you were here, I assume, and so you stayed. Social science being the largest faculty. Study the brain intrigued me, and I wanted to get a degree in something that I would, I think every time a response is put in there, it must update itself. So engineering at Western, but always wanted to be in psychology, so switched. Good choice. I mean, nothing wrong with engineering, but psychology is interesting. You find it interesting and you like how flexible courses are. So lots of good reasons. I went to therapy and wanted to do the same for other people. That's a great reason. So most of you are saying things about you find the topic interesting. A few of you have suggested that Western made sense because you're already here in this town. You're already Londoners, made sense. Others suggested that maybe you switched into it because you found it more compelling than the program you started in. Lots of good reasons. Let's look at another question here. So why did you decide to enroll in this course? Sounds interesting, great things. Let's look at some of those reasons. Fascination with cognitive psychology. You love the cognitive psych course. It seems interesting. Only course that was left for me to take. That's a great example of decision making, right? There's only one thing left to take. It's a third year course. I'm going to take this one. It seemed interesting. Well, I think it is. Hedger's a professor, really enjoyed it. You read Thinking Fast and Slow. Good rating on Rate My Prof, haha. That's good to know. But you got to take these things seriously. If you got a lot of, it's like anything else, right? If you're buying something on Amazon, what do you look for? You don't look for all fives or all ones. You look for a range, and you also want there to be a lot of reviews, right? So 2 or 3 fives tells you nothing. All ones kind of tells you nothing too, but a couple of ones mixed in there with a lot of detail, that might tell you something. If you're looking on Airbnb, where everybody has to give a 10 out of 10, right? Otherwise, they'll ghost you and won't let you rent on the platform again. So found it interesting. Third year required, didn't have many options. That's always good to know. You heard great things. It fit into your schedule. I mean, that's an important thing. There was an article just in the Toronto Star, by the way, yesterday about university students across the province, including at Western, who are frustrated and occasionally leaving and going to other universities because they cannot get into required courses. How many of you have struggled to get into the courses that you need? I'm glad that you all raised your hand. Would you be surprised to know that although we've increased our enrollment at Western by quite a large amount, our faculty members in the Department of Psychology have decreased. Relative to 10 years ago, we have 10 fewer faculty members teaching full-time, even though we have several thousand more students enrolled in psychology. We have fewer courses now than we did before as a result. We offer the same things, but they're often bigger sections. This used to be a smaller section. We sometimes offered courses twice a year when we can only afford to offer them once. This is not a problem that's unique to Western. It's a problem that seems to be maybe not even unique to Ontario, but definitely a problem in Ontario. So getting into a course, it's one of the reasons why there's room for 300 in here, because students need third-year courses, and this is one of them. And we have others, both at the essay courses and non-essay courses that we've tried to increase the enrollment so that students can take.
Do you think there'll be an increase in psych courses that are third and fourth year?
Well, I hope so. I mean, there's a couple of things that probably have factored into there being even fewer this year than normal. And that's because the last 2 years in our department, we had a larger than average number of faculty who were promoted from assistant professor to associate professor, meaning that they got tenure. And for most faculty, when they get tenure, they often take a sabbatical year so they can focus on research, which means they're not teaching. Many of those faculty will come back off sabbatical for the next year. And so we should have more courses available next year. But it's been tight financially at Western, just like every other institution in the province. So I'm glad to continue to be able to offer this course because not only is it required, it's the most important course you're going to take. What's something that I should know about you that might help you succeed in the course? You're a fast learner. Some things just do not register in my head as fast as other people. Well, appreciate your opportunity to discuss concepts. I do actually, as you'll see at the end, I always give everybody the opportunity to write in a form things that they would like me to explain a little bit more the next time around. So we can begin next week, maybe focusing on stuff that wasn't clear. Every class will end with the opportunity with another QR code or a survey to say, what didn't you understand? What would you like me to focus on a little bit more? What was foggy in terms of how I've talked about it? And then I can cover it again to make sure that you have a chance. You like detailed notes so you don't get confused. Clarification of the textbook, does it overlap? Textbook and the course are pretty close. As you probably noticed, it's a textbook that I wrote, so I understand the material pretty well. And this course follows the textbook pretty closely. There's a lot of extra stuff in this course because the second edition of the textbook was published in 2020. So new things have happened. New discoveries have been made. There's new content to add. So I like to add new stuff in the lecture to supplement what's in the textbook. So going through textbook notes, final is super helpful. I write with accommodated exams, creating a space that makes it comfortable for us to ask questions. That's a really good one. I actually like to have as much back and forth as possible, given the constraints of a class with 300 students. It's one of the reasons I like to pause and ask people to put up their hands. As you'll see in this class, I often try to have more of these QR code types of questions where we can answer things either collectively or as a chance to raise your hand. So if you have questions about stuff or if you want to answer a question that I have, it always makes the class better. So lots of chance for discussion. This is the kind of class that, although there's a lot of content, there's also a lot of room for discussion. Let's look at a few other things. We don't want to get to examples. I like to have examples. Guidelines. I've got good guidelines. Functional examples. I have a very short attention span. So I do too. I think we all do. My attention span feels shorter than it used to for a variety of reasons that we will discuss towards the end of today's lecture. I'm more shy and it takes courage to speak up and ask questions. Well, if that's you, then I will do my best to make sure you have the opportunity to contribute either directly or indirectly through some of these class surveys, and we can then look at some of the answers. So I want everybody to know there's a an opportunity for discussion, agreement, disagreement, and so on. If you provide videos, well, I do provide videos. At least the video for this course should be available. But we also have videos in the class itself, which I'll then link to. I'm not going to go through all of these because I can look at these later. What's your hometown? Let's see where everybody's from. Toronto, Chatham, Toronto, London, Brampton, Oakville, Vaughan. So a lot of people from the GTA, but we've got the Sioux, we've got Glastonbury, Connecticut. That's a bit of a way, but glad to have you here. Richmond Hill, Ingersoll, Deep River, Toronto, Markham, Guangzhou, China, Brampton, Ontario, Newmarket, Mississauga, Shanghai. So we've got a good range. London, unfortunately not England, London, Ontario, Aurora, Ontario, St. Thomas. Born in Ottawa, but moved to London when I was 3. So it's great to see a good range of people. So I'm glad to have you all here. And glad you could make it. Let's see, what is one thing you're the most curious about? Creative thoughts. So I got a section on creativity, localization in the brain, heuristics we're going to talk about, decision-making, biology, the brain, I guess, the language and thought chapter. That's a good one. It's one of my favorite topics is language and thinking. So we'll have lots of time to talk about that. And I'll look through these later on. But fortunately, most people said something about thinking. You're in the right place. It's a course on thinking. What are some challenges? The exam. Well, that's always a big challenge. Hours of lecture, lots of memorization. We'll do our best to make sure these things are manageable. Yes, as we'll see in just a few minutes when I go through the exam structure, there are 2 big exams. There's a midterm exam, it's worth 42% of the grade. There's a final exam, which is worth 42% of the grade. They're not cumulative. They're not connected to each other. The first exam covers the first half, second exam covers the second half. The only difference being it's scheduled during the final exam period. The format of the exams are the same. You've got a chance to do some multiple choice, but also some short answer and some writing. So it's a good mix. It's an in-person exam, but the quizzes, as we'll see in a bit, are online quizzes. So they're easier. They're not timed. You just sort of have all day to do them. Obviously, you could cheat your way through them, but you would only be cheating yourselves, wouldn't you? So it's better to use them as a chance to study because they're still easy anyway. And they're not worth that much. So if you cheat your way through, you're not going to actually gain that much. And if you lose a few points by trying to use them to study, you're not going to lose that much either. It'll be challenging. There are some challenging concepts, but we'll do our best to make it through. What's your favorite place in London? Board Game is your favorite place. Masonville Mall, Pottery Studio, Western Campus, the park in the fall. Most people like their house, which is kind of nice to see. I too like my house. It is my favorite place. What's your favorite thing about Western? The campus. I mean, it is kind of a beautiful campus. There's lots of opportunities. People are amazing. There's a good community. Best campus, huge campus, campus greenery. It's not so beautiful today, perhaps, but most of the time it is. Least favorite thing. Most of us don't like the geese. I mean, this is not a surprising answer. London weather, geese poop. Weather being in London, hard to get into courses. Well, I can totally understand this. The geese in London and in Western are kind of unique. I don't know any other campus that has the problem that we do, but you got to live with it. It's just part of being at Western's campus. So you deal with them. Unfortunately for all of us, the geese are their least pleasant during final exam period in the winter term. So that's when they start going crazy. And that's when they get really aggressive and violent, is right at the time when you need to start studying and you need less drama in your life. And the geese exist primarily to give you more drama in your life. Okay, so that's great. Thank you for answering all these questions. Let's do a little bit of course operation stuff. And I'm going to stay here and move into the Brightspace page just briefly. We don't need to go through the entire course outline. It's there. You can read it, but I do want to cover a few things. And I want to cover both this year's course and last year's course. First, this year's course, of course, our course outline is right here. And you can find it right here. I just want to cover a couple of things briefly. Let me see if I can make this. It's going to make it bigger. There we go. We've got 2 TAs. for the course. You probably won't interact with them a lot because they don't run tutorials, but they will be a good resource if you have questions. I'll be asking both of the TAs to provide me with weekly office hours that will also work the same way that my office hours are. You can either make an appointment with them during that time, or you can visit them online. And that's a great resource if you need to review something or ask questions about the class or ask something about the quiz, those types of things. So the TAs will be doing a lot of the marking as well. The quizzes, being multiple choice quizzes delivered online, are automatically graded. So there's really nothing to review other than the answers. But as you will see, as soon as the grades are released, the answers for the quizzes are released as well. So if you happen to choose a wrong answer, you'll see what the right answer is. These are not complicated questions. Enough content exists on the internet that it's not worth keeping these secret. They're not secret exam questions. So the answers are obvious. You would be able to look them up. So I'd rather have you know what the right answer is after you've taken the quiz than to wonder what the right answer is after you've taken the quiz. So those will all be handled pretty easily. The teaching assistants will do a lot of the marking of the midterm and the final, which have a written component as well as a multiple choice component. So they will also be able to review exams with you afterwards if you have questions. I'll talk a little bit about that in the course outline in just a minute. You can contact any of us by our emails. In years past, I used to use one of those generic emails. It's called Psych3130. That's just more trouble than it's worth, to be honest, because I get too much email as it is already. Then I just have another email address to check. And of course, I'm expecting the TAs to also check it, and we never know who's responding to what. So just email me. If you need to ask me a question, email the TAs if you need to ask the TAs a question. We're here. Here's the passcode. You've already got it because some people have learned it and used it. Videos are uploaded to OWL and YouTube sometime afterwards. I can't promise it's going to be right away, but usually once I'm done with this lecture, I go back to my office, space out for a little while, have lunch, and then I post the lectures online afterwards. If we happen to have severe weather or if something happens where we can't be here, I can just run the class remotely anyway. So that's easy enough. Here's some information about my office hours, TA office hours, course material. It's the textbook. You can find it at the bookstore. It's on the publisher. You can get it from VitalSource. You can rent it. For those of you that are interested, I haven't yet done this. I should be able to put one on reserve at the library. Also, the first edition of the textbook, which was from 2015, so it's 10 years old now, is available for free online through the Western Library. I'd say it's about 80% similar. And a lot of the new stuff I'm covering in class anyway. And one of the things that the second edition has, the first edition doesn't have, is a great glossary at the end of terms to know, which often are good questions for multiple choice questions. In order to save you the expense of purchasing the textbook, if you want to use the free online version at the library, I'll also upload the terms to know, the glossary on the site. So if you choose not to spend the money on the second edition and want to use the first edition for free, you'll probably do just fine. You'll be able to have access to all of this content. You'll have the book and you'll have the glossary and definitions. Second edition is still a little bit better. It's 5 years newer and it's the second edition. I added new stuff to it. But it's not necessary to buy that textbook to succeed in this course. Personally, if I were in this course, I'd probably use the free one because I would just feel like it would probably be good enough. We're going to talk about this idea of doing stuff that's good enough. If you've taken this course, it's cognitive psychology with me. I talk about the concept of satisficing, and that means setting a criteria and doing what you need to satisfy that criteria. Sometimes doing stuff that's good enough to succeed is sufficient. You don't always need to be a perfectionist. And so, works for you to use the free textbook, I would have no problem with it. You could probably find free versions of the second edition from various sketchy websites, but I wouldn't trust it personally to download free versions that have been copyright violation PDF versions. But they're there. I have one myself. So I know they're around. Course notes, that's yours. If you take notes, you can share them with anybody else. You can upload them. And you can record this lecture. I don't know why you would since I'm recording it, but there's no problem with you recording the lecture yourself. I'm not going to go through the learning objectives. They're there. Let me briefly go through the quizzes. So these are going to be available online. We've got a schedule down below, and you'll see the schedule on the course outline. You'll see the schedule on the Bright Space page, and these will eventually all be put into Exam Central. So if you write with accommodations and you're wondering when the midterm is going to be, that should be entered in sometime this week. The individual quizzes will also be entered on Exam Central for record keeping, but there isn't really a system for accommodations for these online quizzes, and that's because they're basically available right after the class on the day they're scheduled. So we'll finish up at 12:30, and then the quiz opens up. And it'll stay open for 10 hours until 10:30 at night. It's not timed, so you can take it whenever you want. You can take it right away. You can take it towards the end of the day. If you usually receive extra time to do something, as through an accommodations office, you wouldn't need extra time in this case because everybody has all day. You could start it at 12:30 and finish it. Do one question an hour, and you'd still be okay. It might log you out. I have no idea. I'm not recommending that you do one question an hour, but it's technically possible. So just take the time that you need and use it as a study tool rather than as a stressful assessment. They're open book, open note, you're home. You can even have the slides up. You can Control F to find things in your own notes and the slides. It's really a chance for it to help you review the material and to get a small grade for doing so. They're just worth 4% of the grade. There's 5 of them, but I dropped the lowest one. So if you've missed one, that's the lowest one. That's a 0, and I'll drop that one. So there really isn't a system for makeup quizzes because they're so open and available for everyone. And because I dropped the lowest one, there's no makeup. So if you happen to miss one or forget one, I don't know why you would, because I'll send out reminders every day and I'll remind you in class, and there'll be email reminders and owl reminders. So lots of reminders for the quiz. But should it come to pass that you forget a quiz, there's no harm there. That 0 would just be dropped anyway. If you forget 2 quizzes, you would have a 0 and for the quiz that wasn't dropped, but it's only worth 4% of your grade. So it's not a stressful 0, it's just a minor nuisance, as it were. Is that all clear? So 2 quizzes, or sorry, 4 quizzes counted, 5 total. 2 exams, they're in person. Exam number 1 is going to be right here in this classroom. There's enough room for us to take the exam here. Not everybody's going to be spaced out perfectly, but when it comes time for the midterm, we're going to meet here during class time and take the midterm. I'll have proctors here, we'll hand everything out, and you'll write it over the course of 3 hours. So it's a 3-hour midterm. If you write with accommodations, you'll make those arrangements as necessary, and those exams will be taken with accommodated services. So just like any other midterm. And then, of course, it's time for winter break right after that week. So this is the week before winter break. So you will go away to wherever it is you're going to, back home, somewhere nice, maybe just staying here and chilling out for a while. I think I'm going to Mexico, actually, so I will not be grading your, but the TAs will. TAs will be doing the marking during that time, and with luck, we'll have everything marked before you get back. But it doesn't always happen. Sometimes we're a little bit later, so it might take 2 weeks for us to get the final grades back. But the final grades will be released at some point shortly after you return from winter break. Makeup exam policies. So there's no makeup for the quizzes. You already probably know how to deal with makeup exams. All documentation that is not covered. I don't think I specifically say on this midterm that it's one of those midterms. You know how you have to have, you can have a non-documented absence, right? You can submit this undocumented absence through the portal. Professors can designate whether or not an exam or an assignment must have documentation. I might have, if you are unable to obtain, it just says you have to obtain permission. You may not use an okay, so this is one that you must not use an undocumented absence. So you must have a documentation to miss either the midterm or the final. Final exams, you always have to have documentation. So make sure you plan appropriately if you're unable to take that midterm exam. That has to happen within 48 hours. I think you need to submit the documentation. I'm usually always very flexible about these kinds of things. So as long as that documentation comes in, there's no problem. The makeup exam will be scheduled, it hasn't been put on the calendar, but it'll be scheduled sometime after you return from your breaks. So that's another decision that you often need to make. Weigh the costs and benefits. If you wake up on the day of midterm and you've got a fever of 101, do not take the exam. I would look for accommodation. If I had a high fever, I would think that I'm very sick. If I had a cold, I might take it. If I had a fever of 99, I might say, well, I don't know. That's where it's a little bit more difficult. You might want to take seek accommodations and take the makeup when you feel better, but maybe you won't feel better in 2 weeks. Maybe you'll be sick in a different way. You'll also be 3 weeks past the last time we talked about the content. So you'll be further from the content. So those are the kinds of decisions you might want to make when you're deciding whether or not you want to take that makeup exam. I'm very flexible with makeup exams, but there's always, sometimes it's hard to make that decision whether or not it's going to be effective or not. And of course, all your midterms are at the same time, aren't they? They're all around that midterm break, I think. So you've got, if you miss one, you're probably missing others, and you're looking to schedule those things at other times. So if you have any challenges, or if you're experiencing some unsettled or uncertainty, don't hesitate to ask for advice on these issues, and I'm happy to give you some suggestions. Each one's worth 42%, by the way. And that's how it works. So you'll see the rest of this, we don't need to go through too much of this detail. All of the quizzes are listed on here. They're online. The midterm is here in person on February 10th. Final exams will be scheduled sometime in April. If these things change, if anything changes, I'll make an announcement and update a new version of the course outline. We're going to be covering all of this content. I'm going to switch away back to the slides after this. Today is all introductory material, and in just a few minutes, we'll start talking about introductory thinking material. Next week, we're going to talk about similarity. Then we talk about knowledge concepts, language concepts and categories, language and thought, and then we have the exam. We've got our reading week. Then we talk about more sophisticated thinking, like inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, context, motivation and mood, decision-making, problem solving, creativity and expertise. So we take what we learned in the first half, which is how people store memories, how they have access to concepts, how they form concepts, and how they use language to manipulate mental representations. And we apply that in the second half of the course, where we talk about inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and problem solving. So what you learned in the first half applies really well to be the building blocks for what you're going to think about in the second half of this course. Everything else on here just has to do with stuff that's required for course outlines, like academic integrity, where to submit absences and considerations and so on. So one quick thing, so each one of these, of course, I haven't posted the slides for this yet. Here's the slides for today. Here's our course outline, but I haven't posted anything else. You'll see on these courses what they should look like later is you'll go back later today and you will see that there's an MP4, so there's a video that you can play right here, and usually a link to a YouTube channel as well. So sometime later today, that extra information will be added in the same place. Otherwise, this course is organized on Brightspace pretty much the same way that all of the other courses are organized. Everything is over here, and there'll be announcements as they come sort of on the front page. So welcome back. I've been teaching. So any announcements will just show up here and likely stay. Any questions on this before we go on? All right, we're doing really well here. So let me pick up. These are some things I already mentioned a bit. There we go. Let's hide this floating meeting control now. And let's put me over here. So I mentioned briefly, there's two versions of this textbook. I'm fine with you using either one. Second one is a little bit better. There's more content. There's the glossary, but just to make it easier for you, I'll upload the glossary content on the Brightspace page. So even if you're using that free version, you'll have the content for the second version.
Use the free version, like there wouldn't be content that's like exclusive to the second edition other than the glossary stuff.
There's new stuff. Yeah. So there probably will be some things, but I cover a lot of it in class. This again is one of those cost benefit kind of decisions you need to make. Textbook's about $100. I think it's $90. It's not an exceptionally expensive textbook. You can rent it for less than that. There are lots of used versions available because it's been on this, it's been here for a while. It's at use at least at 2 or 3 other schools. TMU uses this textbook and so does Waterloo. So there are other places where you can buy it used online. The free version is a great resource, but it does miss some stuff. Not only the glossary, but also some of the content. But that said, it's still about 80%. And I do cover a lot of things in class. I don't cover everything in class, but that's, you know, that's a decision to make. Where am I? Oh, I got to click back on the actual slide here. Put myself back in how it's. Let's move myself here. Okay, so I think I've covered all of this. The lecture notes are always available. If you ever see that they're missing, send an email to me. Oftentimes I put them up there and forget to make them visible. This is, for whatever reason, Brightspace defaults to, if I upload something, it defaults to making it not visible. So I have to remember to upload it, then click a little thing that says make visible. Occasionally that doesn't happen. So if you ever see that they're missing, just remind me. I'll put them right up. You can do anything you want with these. I guess if I were in your shoes and I had a device, I might take notes right on the PDF. That's probably what a lot of students do. Or I might just use them and take notes on a laptop or print them even if you wanted to do things old school. We've already covered most of this stuff. We've talked about the grades. The grades in this class tend to be around 80. So the expectations for the psychology department or the 3rd year courses should have grades somewhere between 70 and 78. That's kind of average for a 3rd year course. And you've probably seen some grade expectations in your other courses. I looked back since 2015. Prior to 2015, it's a little hard to get data for this because we used several different systems ago. So I don't always have the grade reports in a format that's easy to read, but I figured 10 years is easy enough. So I went back to 2015 and I calculated the average for the course along with the standard error. And this has pretty much been hovering around 80. So if you are expecting to be an average student in this course, you might expect a grade around 80. I think that's reasonable. I can't guarantee anything, but that's a good expectation. If you are diligent, make it to every class, do all the readings, and study well for the exams, you'll likely do better. If you don't, you'll likely do worse, but not dramatically worse. As you can see, there's a pretty tight error bars. These are standard error of measurements. So they take into account the size of the class. How many of you are familiar with standard error bars? Standard error bars use the standard deviation, and then they also use the size of the sample. I forgot to put myself in do not disturb. What's going on here? These are all just family group chat things, not important. The course has grown, though, in size. Since 2015, when I used to have 75 students in the class, somewhere things got out of hand. And this became a very large course. So in the last 2 years, and this year, again, it'll be around 300. So this course has more than doubled in size over the last few years. When I first taught it in 2004, I had 30 students in the class. So it was a much smaller class. It was like a seminar style class. And now we've got 300. So it is 10 times bigger than it used to be. But the grades are about the same. The content is similar, and I hope it's still in the class. So let's switch over to talking about some content. Let's talk about thinking and defining it and studying it for the next 15 minutes. Then we'll take a little bit of a break. Is everybody still okay to go forth maybe for 15 minutes? I feel like the change in topic is kind of like a mental break, even though it's not a physical break. So are we all good? So let's look at a definition first. You could probably call a lot of things thinking, but here's how I like to define it. It's a mental activity. So it uses what we would refer to as the mind, which is, I guess, a state of activation of the brain. The mind is what your brain is aware of. Your brain is the organ that does the mind, just like circulation is the function of your circulatory system in your heart. And oxygenation is the process that your heart and your lungs do. The mind is the process that your brain carries out. But the mind is more than just your brain. It's part of your body, it's part of society, it's how you interact with other people. And of course, it's the information that you've acquired over your 18 to 20 to 30, in my case, 56 years of existence. So you've been around, you've learned some things, you've seen some things, and you've retained some things, and those become part of your mind. So that's mental activity that involves working with mental representations. A mental representation, lots of different definitions for this. But for now, let's define a mental representation as a state of activation, the state of neural activation that you're aware of. It stands in for an experience. How many of you had something for breakfast? You had something for breakfast, right? You've got a memory for what you had for breakfast. There's a concept of breakfast, which is the meal that you eat first. You probably have maybe a set breakfast routine. How many of you have a breakfast routine and eat the same thing 90% of the day? It's a really common thing to do, right? A breakfast routine. So that's a concept. That's a mental representation. You've got a representation for what a routine is. You have an idea of what it means to have a routine. Maybe you have an idea for what overnight oats are, or what oatmeal is, or what avocado toast, or scrambled eggs, or whatever it is you have for breakfast, or a bagel, breakfast sandwich. You've got concepts for what those are, but you also have a specific individual memory for yourself doing that. Those are all kinds of mental representations. They relate to experiences that you've had, but they're not the actual experience anymore. They're a representation. That's not really what representation means, but that's one way you can think of it. A representation is a representation of an experience. It's just happening from the inside instead of from the outside. Sometimes it's triggered by things from the outside. You remember something that happened. So working with mental representation, planning and executing behaviors, so deciding what you're going to do based on your access to those representations, and coordinating cognitive resources like your attention and your perception and your mental stamina, the ability to stay awake through a long period of time, like a 3-hour lecture on a Tuesday morning in January. A lot of these things like basic visual perception, the mechanisms that we use to decompose things that enter into our eyes and turn into a visual experience, or memory consolidation, coordination of sensory motor activity. Those are sophisticated mental activities, but we don't think about them as thinking per se. A lot of these things are biological and just happen. Vision is something that we're biologically designed to do, most of us, right? And so we have a system of detecting things visually in the ocular system that works into a primary visual cortex and a secondary visual cortex. All of that happens without you thinking about it. That's what helps you form the representations that you can then later think about. So when I talk about thinking, I'm not talking about basic visual perception and memory consolidation. These cognitive processes together often accomplish a goal, and that goal is goal thinking. There's different kinds of thinking. There's fast and slow thinking. One of you mentioned Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And this is sort of a really common approach. This idea that there are fast and slow ways to think precedes Daniel Kahneman's book. And it's something that's been in existence in cognitive science and cognitive psychology for a number of decades. But we have a sense that there's a fast way to make decisions. Intuition, right? Where you just kind of know what the right answer is, or maybe a fast response to a stimulus. These kinds of things rely on more evolutionarily primitive brain structure. Your fight or flight system is hardly even a thinking system at all, right? It's more of a response. The things that are built on quick responses tend to be evolutionary. They tend to be fast things. This kind of behavior is also present in non-human species. So this fast system is kind of the one that you have, that you've inherited from many different kinds of evolutionary processes. It's what you're given when you start in the world. You got a fast way to respond to things. It's also a kind of thinking that you use when you're really good at something. When you have a lot of experience in a domain, you don't always have to take a lot of time to reason through alternatives. You often have an intuitive feeling for what the answer might be. We'll talk about this in just a few minutes when we talk about different kinds of thinking in games. Some games require a lot of analysis, but you can also do well by reacting to memories that you've stored. And once you start to react to stored memories, even your sophisticated thinking starts to resemble system one thinking. It's really fast because you have a lot of memories at the ready. System two is slower and it's reasoned-based. It's the kind of thinking that you go through when you're solving a complex problem. It's the kind of thinking that you might go through when you're trying to decide, should I apply to this internship? It's the kind of thinking that you might go through when you're trying to decide, should I break up with this person? What are the pros and cons in staying to this relationship? Sure, intuition matters, but sometimes you need to override that intuition with a rational approach. And so this idea of fast thinking and slow thinking, working in parallel, but sometimes working in opposition, anchors a lot of what we're going to talk about. We're going to refer to this in this refer to it in this chapter and in lots of other chapters as the dual process account. So solving a physics problem would be an example of system two complex thinking. So if you have to solve the problem, how many of you have taken a course in physics? Has anybody thought about being a physics major or studying at the university? Physics is kind of hard. Not going to lie. I mean, physics seems hard to me. Sometimes it's easy. What about the problem of calculating the trajectory of a projectile with wind resistance? So, in other words, if something starts here, where is it going to end up? You've got to know a lot of things. It's actually kind of complicated. This guy explains it really well.
In this video, we're going to look at the trajectory of a projectile which is experiencing a drag force or an air resistance force proportional to its own velocity. In other words, it's going to be spinning.
I'm already lost. But look, it's 26 minutes long.
So to solve those two equations to find x as a function of time and y as a function of time. In other words, a has to just be now if those are going to be equal minus.
Okay, so 22 minutes, we're not going to watch all 22 minutes. He goes on for quite a ways to how to solve this complex problem, and he's evidently really good. Wow. This is amazingly instructive. Thanks so much for sharing. People loved this video. This is a great video for how to solve this very complex problem of physics. In other words, where is this projectile that starts here? And there's wind resistance, which you need to know the size of the object, the direction of the wind. You need to know the exit velocity. Where is it going to end? That's a complex problem. How do I get back into big here? No. So what's going on? All right. I'm going to go back into big. It didn't go back into big. I have no idea what's happening. But most outfielders can solve this really easy. In fact, most kids can solve this problem really easily with just a little practice. How many of you have played baseball or softball or something like that, right? So it's not it can be stressful. If you've ever been in the outfield in a stressful situation, if you've played, junior ball, and all the pressure is on you because you're in center field, right? And this ball is coming towards you, you might choke, right, and drop it. That's really embarrassing when that happens because everybody's looking at you. But generally, getting there is not that hard, right? You're not doing all of those physics problems. Trying to calculate rationally where that trajectory is going to end is complicated. But putting yourself there and doing it over and over again is much less complicated. And we'll talk about how this is done. He just makes the jump. He knows exactly where to be. And we're not going to get into Dalton Varsho's batting ability. That's a different issue. But as an outfielder, he's fantastic, right? He knows exactly where to be. He's right there. Everybody was waiting for him. He's going to get it. This is a fast and slow kind of thinking. Let's quit this. End show. And let's see if I can get this to go big again. All right. I don't want to. I don't know what it's asking me to do, but. So two kinds of thinking, fast and slow. The slow kind of thinking is taking 27 minutes to solve the problem with equations. The fast way is just doing it, right? Over and over again until you know exactly where to be when that ball lands. You don't need to calculate the exit velocity in your head rationally, but you do calculate the exit velocity and the exit point in your mind quickly with system one so that you can put yourself there. Notice that not only is Dalton Varsho solving that problem, he's actually solving a more complicated problem. He's also putting himself where it's going to be. So he knows where it's going to end up, but that's only half the problem. He's also got to put himself there and know when to start running and when to stop running and to be there exactly when it's going to be there. So it's a very complicated problem that most of us could solve with practice. Maybe not as good as Dalton Varsho, but probably okay. You would be able to catch something. If I were throwing it back, you'd be able to put yourself where it's going. Michael Macbeth at Kent State University, really interested in this back in the 90s, and actually asked the question, how do outfielders calculate the trajectory? And essentially what he did was ask them, this is in 1995, before simple head cameras like GoPros were invented. And so what he did was he asked them to essentially carry one of those large VHS recorders on their shoulder while fly balls were hit to them. And frankly, up until then, it wasn't really entirely known how outfielders solve this problem. Outfielders know how to do it, but they don't necessarily know how to explain it to others. If you've ever played in the outfield, or if you've ever just tried to catch something that's being thrown to you, or if you play pickleball or tennis or football or anything else which involves a projectile, you can usually do it, but it's really hard to instruct exactly how that's done. What Macbeth found, and this was published in Science magazine, which is one of the highest impact factor journals, is through a lot of complex analysis, what fielders do is they just keep moving so that the ball seems to keep heading straight up. That's it. That's the way to solve the problem intuitively. You just keep moving yourself so that as you're looking at the ball, it appears to only go straight up. If it's going off to the side, you need to run faster. If it's going off to this side, you've run too fast. You've run too far. You need to keep positioning yourself so that it only appears to rise directly straight up at you. And if it keeps coming at you and straight up, it'll eventually look like it's going straight up, 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 and eventually just right into your glove. That's how you solve the problem. You put yourself so that it always only appears to go straight up. Angles to the side or left, you adjust your motion. If you undershoot it, then it appears to be going over your head. You don't want that because that's no longer going straight up. You want it to go straight up until it lands to your glove. But it took a lot of analysis to figure this out, where fielders were going to position themselves. But it turns out to be a fairly simple heuristic. Just keep moving until the ball goes straight up and lands in your glove if you're lucky. So we've got different kinds of thinking in more manageable games. How many of you can still remember Angry Birds on your very first device? Does it even still exist anymore? It probably does. Would you play it? Probably not. I hope not. So Angry Birds, the #1 game. So it's essentially the same thing, right? It's a projectile game, right? You're just throwing things, except these are things that have been rendered digitally. But the whole idea is just calculating trajectories. But you could probably, do you remember sort of spending a lot of time with games like this? Not just Angry Birds, but Where's My Water? Cut the Rope? You know, all of those Castle Crush games, all of those, what's it called? Castle something? There's all of those games you probably played back when you were in elementary school, which all involve kind of the same thing, just throwing things on the screen and making them crash. There's not a lot of rational thinking going on there, but you could still get better at it, right? You could still get better the more that you did. How many of you play chess? Does anybody play chess really well? Or do you play chess just somewhat well? Some of you play chess really well. So there's a lot more thinking that goes into playing chess, right? There are a lot of specific kind of opening moves. How many of you have never played chess or have no experience with chess? So even if you don't, you could sort of get an idea of what a game like this would be like, right? Each piece has a series of moves that it can do. So there are rules. There's a chessboard. Chess is going to actually come up in 3 or 4 other lectures in this class because it's a really good domain to analyze thinking. It's a really good domain to analyze expertise. How many of you have seen Queen's Gambit, even if you haven't played chess? So popular Netflix series. One of the things that it did really well in terms of understanding how people play chess at a high level is Beth, who's the protagonist in the story, is described as being an intuitive player. In other words, she's described as being the kind of player who just kind of knows what to do, maybe through system 1 thinking, has a lot of intuition for how to play. But intuition was never enough. So most of you have probably seen this series, and even if you haven't, you can sort of get some sense. Intuition isn't really enough. No matter how good you might be intuitively, you need to build on that intuition with memory. And so what you saw throughout the series was a lot of training that went reading about chess games, replaying chess games, understanding chess games that are historical, knowing what should happen in one move and what somebody else did. And if you saw towards the end of the series, you saw how the only way you could overcome something in this case, the only way you could really win or be a grand champion, the best ways to be an excellent chess player are to have other people teaching you how to play chess, even if they're not better than you, having other people help with some of the analysis. So chess is a game that requires a lot of system 2 thinking. We'll talk about this in just a bit, but you still need to study it. When we talk about experts and expertise later in this course, we're going to talk about how one thing that chess experts really do well is have a lot of memory for chess games that they've played or chess games that other people have played. Chess requires coordination of cognitive resources. It's not the only game that does, but it's a really good one to study. You've got to have basic knowledge of the rules. You got to know how to apply those rules. You got to know how to be able to move things according to the rules. If you're getting better at playing chess, you need to know things about recall of common chess positions. You need to know about very specific kinds of games. You also need to do things like anticipating another player's moves. So it's not just knowing how to play, it's knowing how you think somebody else might play. You want to develop your responses on other people's predicted responses. Even if you don't play chess, how many of you play other games like poker, for example, or games that require some kind of understanding of what the opponent might do? That's a different leap of thinking. That means that not only do you need to know what you're doing, you need to know if the other person knows what they're doing, or if they're faking. And maybe they're pretending like they don't know what they're doing, or maybe they're pretending what they do know what they're doing. So you need to develop what's known as a theory of mind. A theory of mind is something that develops in humans through childhood and into adolescence, where you understand that a person's mind is responsible, at least in part, for their behavior. You understand that your opponent in chess, or your classmate, or your friend, or your enemy, for that matter, has a mind. It has goals and uses their mind and goals to plan their behaviors. Understanding that a person's behaviors are a product of their mind is known as developing a theory of mind. So you have a theory that somebody else has a mind just like you do. Not everybody has that. Little kids, little children don't yet have a fully developed theory of mind. They may not develop the idea that other people have the same sense that they have. Animals probably don't have a theory of mind. As much as you would like to believe that your pet cat or dog has a theory of mind, they probably don't have a theory of mind. So chess and visually oriented games. Chess emphasizes rule acquisition and memory retrieval. Video games like Angry Birds focus on intuitive procedural motor responses. One is effortful, the other one is intuitive. Both of these kinds of things have a shared reliance on memory. Just like you can get good at chess by playing it and having memory for previous chess games, You could get good at Angry Birds. It wouldn't really benefit you in any way to get good at Angry Birds, but you would get better. And you get better because you remember things about it. You remember certain scenarios and ways. If you play other kinds of more sophisticated video games, of course, you remember the scenarios and the storylines that go along with those video games. So they both depend on retrieving prior instances from memory. So this is a good time for a break. It turns out to be 10:45, and that's why I built this particular slide right here. We can define and discuss thinking fast and slow. So let's talk after the break about the different ways to study thinking, and then we'll talk about some of the shortcomings and challenges of the thinking process. So quick break, maybe till no longer than 11 o'clock. We'll be back here and we'll cover the second half of the lunch. Yes.
So did right? It's so hot. I stay awake. I don't think right now. I'm such a I haven't had a 9:30. Yeah. In both Vancouver and Toronto. Classes with me and Maddie. Oh,
I was trying to find a short answer and actually it was a.
I was trying to get an expense. I was so hard.
I didn't hear.
That's fitness. I'm like, yeah, because I couldn't do it earlier. And from in the guys, I'm gonna be only doing on her birthday. Oh, it's but I'm not like I like, yeah, it's like that. Oh, yeah. Right, you're like, oh, I lied. I'm that's my other lap, dude. I mean,
All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's continue. I'm going to try to get through everything left in this class for the next hour or so. So this class technically runs till 12:20. My goal is usually to finish by about 12:10, just because that's a good enough time to finish. But if we run up to 12:20 and we haven't finished the material, we'll just stop right at 12:20 and cover the rest next week. So that does happen on occasion. If I get sidetracked or something, or if it takes a little bit longer to get through something, it might take me a little bit longer. So if we don't finish all of this stuff, I'll try to condense it for the beginning of next class, but I think we'll do okay. So we wanted to talk about some ways to study thinking. This is all information that's in the textbook. So that's what we're going to talk about next. Maybe I should hide this floating meeting controls. And I don't know where I am on this screen, but I guess I'm still there. Hopefully I'm still coming through on the Zoom. If not, I guess that's too bad. So let's talk about some theoretical approaches. So the textbook goes into more detail on this, but I do want to cover some of the main ones. The first is what's known as a Gestalt approach. The second is the cognitive approach. And the third is the dual process approach, which we already spent some time on. So this Gestalt approach is kind of the earliest of the three. Gestalt psychology, if you took intro psychology, you probably talked a little bit about this in that course. If you're taking a course on the history of psychology, you might have talked about this. This is a sort of an approach to studying thinking and psychology that was kind of prominent about 100 years ago in European universities. So Gestalt psychology is a German approach to studying how the mind works. The Gestalt means the sort of a shape. And one of the things Gestalt psychologists emphasized was how is it that we perceive objects as whole shapes? I mean, that's kind of a complex problem if you try to break it down. How do we take bits of pieces of information that we take in through our eyes and then come to understand it as an object or a shape? We're not going to talk about object recognition in this class. But what Gestalt psychologists were most interested in was arguing that the mind that you have is not just some kind of blank slate. It's not a blank, piece that needs to be written on. So you don't start as an infant with nothing. You start with some assumptions about the world. You start with an understanding about how the world works. Your mind is designed to process information and deal with representations. That's what it does. Even as an infant, you start to form concepts. You start to remember things. You remember who your mom was from day 1 to day 2. You start to develop senses of familiarity. You start to quickly develop language and the ability to orient your gaze towards things that matter and away from things that don't matter. So infants learn really quickly how to deal with mental representations. And Gestalt psychologists, when they were interested in studying thinking, made the distinction between productive and reproductive thinking. And these are sort of two ways to think. Productive thinking is solving a problem with insight. So you produce something. You come up with a new solution. You come up with a creative approach. You take what you know and you do something different with it. That's a productive thought. Reproductive thinking is, especially within the problem-solving domain, refers to solving or doing something by remembered examples or remembered rules. So when you and I are solving problems, we're doing both most of the time. We're relying on our memory, but we're often trying to use it in new ways. Creative problem solvers, as we'll discuss later in this term when we talk about creativity, are people who have a lot of ground rules, have a lot of basic knowledge, but can use it in slightly different ways, unexpected ways, maybe take new shortcuts that haven't yet been devised. If you're interested in things like creativity or in things like innovation or technological innovations or conceptual innovations, that's what an innovation is. It's taking what's known and coming up with something that's unknown. That is a productive thought versus a reproductive thought, which is doing the same thing many times over and over again. We do them both all the time. So the Gestalt approach emphasizes whole objects, but it emphasizes this distinction between productive and reproductive thinking. Here's a heuristic. A heuristic is something we're going to talk about a little bit later today. We're going to talk about it in lots of other lectures. A heuristic is, well, can anybody define a heuristic? What's a good definition for a heuristic?
Shortcut.
A mental shortcut, taking what you know and doing something a little bit quicker. So you take advantage of your knowledge and you solve a problem more quickly. A great example of a heuristic for most people is when you learn to navigate through a new city. The first time you're in a city, first time you're visiting somewhere, you might use Google Maps or Apple Maps to help you figure out how to get somewhere. But the more familiar you are with a place, the less you need to rely on that. And you can start taking actual physical shortcuts because you know the neighborhood better. You know how long it takes when you first showed up on campus. How many of you can remember back to your first year at Western? You probably didn't know where things were. You had to look at a campus map or ask people. But as you spent time walking from one class to the next, you probably got really good at knowing how long it takes to get from here to some other place. And you can come up with shortcuts. Maybe you come up with alternative ways when the traffic is blocked, like it's probably going to be. Philip Aziz, by the way, as you know, was blocked over the last holidays. I guarantee you the city's going to close it during spring exams. I have no knowledge of this, but it's just how things work, right? So you can guarantee the traffic's going to get worse right around the time of spring exam. So a heuristic is a mental shortcut. That's something that we can do that involves remembered examples, but then produce something new with that. So the Gestalt approach emphasized these heuristics, productive, reproductive thinking. Around the same time in the United States and in North America and in Canada, an alternative approach was a cognitive approach. So whereas Gestalt psychologists thought about how we interact with the environment as a whole, cognitive psychologists wanted to break things down into small pieces. This is sort of the North American approach to psychology. A book that was written in 1956 by Jerome Bruner called A Study of Thinking was probably the first cognitive approach to thinking. And one of the things that they argued in this text is you can understand complex behaviors by breaking it down into small individuals. You can understand how people make life-changing decisions by studying how they make small decisions. You can understand how people solve complex problems by studying how they solve simpler problems, artificial problems, problems that you create in a laboratory. Chess, for example, although it's not one of the ones that we would describe as an artificial problem, essentially is a lot of artificial problems, right? It's not the kind of problem you need to solve to get through your life, but it presents you with lots of small problems in a manageable, controlled environment. Chess is like a thinking experiment. The other thing that they argued is that you can study thinking experimentally. You can carry out experiments in a laboratory that allow people to demonstrate their mental abilities. Prior to that, it wasn't something that most psychologists were interested in. Psychologists who did lab work prior to this were mostly studying animals, studying rats, studying cats, primates, non-human primates. Human psychology tended to emphasize more complex things. And so Bruner's work suggested you can study human behavior in a laboratory as well by breaking down complex problems into smaller lab-instituted problems. And one of the things that was key to this was the idea of a mental representation. So we've already defined this once, but a mental representation is a stable state of activation within a cognitive or neural system that corresponds to an event, an object, or an idea. It's a representation of something that happened to you. It could be something that happened out there, like an event that you experienced, or it could be something that happened in here, like activation of a memory. As soon as you remember something, you create a new representation or you strengthen an existing representation. My representation of cats would consist of everything I know about them. Images of cats, memories of my own cats, feelings of affection, and all of these things are part of a concept, and that's a mental representation. Different parts of that concept are useful in scenarios. Thinking is the process of manipulating these mental representations. And cognitive accounts emphasize something known as symbolic processing. So a symbolic process means that you are thinking about something even when it's not happening. You have a symbol, a mental symbol. For us as humans, that mental symbol is usually language. When we're thinking about a memory for something, we describe it using language. In fact, it's probably kind of hard to describe your memories or your thoughts or even experience your memories and thoughts without accessing language, right? I mean, if you, even if I ask you to think about something, you say, okay, what did I have for breakfast? You say to yourself in your inner voice, and you're using language. It's really hard to investigate your own thoughts without resorting to language. That's kind of the symbol that we're talking about. So all of this stuff that happens to you is replayed via your language as a symbol. And so what are the different ways to manipulate mental representations? Well, fast and slow ways, right? We've got the intuitive way, which is we maybe don't use language. Maybe we don't access and describe something, we just act on it because we've done it before. Or maybe we use a little bit more thought, a little bit more time, a little bit more active processing to do it more slowly. And so we've already talked about this dual process account, the fast system and the slow system. And that's the third approach to thinking that we're going to emphasize. So we're going to emphasize the Gestalt approach, problem solving, looking at wholes versus parts. The cognitive approach breaks things down into small parts. And the fast and slow approach, the dual process approach, suggests that we can do things based on intuition, or we can take a little bit of time. And sometimes these things run into opposition. So what kind of behaviors, this is a selection from the textbook, rely on system one? When you make a decision with your gut, is often, it's in parentheses, your gut decision, because you're not really making a decision with your gut. What does that mean to make a decision with your gut? When I say that, use that metaphor, what does that mean? Give me a definition of making a decision with your gut.
Like a decision based on how you feel about something, whether the decision like makes you feel comfortable or not.
Yeah, how you feel about something. And so the reason a lot of people use that metaphor, and this is what we're going to talk about when we talk about language and thinking. The reason the language of making a decision with your gut often comes up is how many of you have probably all been in this situation where you're having a conversation with someone, and let's say it's a little bit of a heated conversation. Let's say that you've done something that you didn't want somebody else to find out about. And let's suppose that in the period of the conversation, they appear to know and they call you out on it. What happens? Do you feel like a flush? like a little bit of a sickness in your stomach. Sometimes you feel adrenaline because you know maybe an argument or a fight is going to happen. Maybe you feel shame or embarrassment. Your face gets hot. You can't lie anymore because you've been caught. That's a terrible feeling, isn't it? You can feel that in your gut. That's what it means to say a gut situation. How many of you have been in an interaction with someone and you think, I do not want to be in this interaction. I do not, there's something about this person I just do not trust. You probably get that sense, right? You get a sense that there isn't anything they said. They didn't say, I am not a trustworthy person, but they behave in a way that seems untrustworthy, and you kind of feel it in your body. That's what it means to have a gut reaction. So often it is something that is physical. There are hormones involved that might tell you to prepare for something, or they tell you to escape, tell you to get out of something, or tell you to work act more warmly towards something. So I say, like, what are the differences between system 1 and system 2 when you're interacting with someone? Suppose two people live in the same floor of an apartment building. You might see each other every few days as each arrives home from work or errands. Initially, neither person extends a greeting to the other, but at some point, somebody's going to say hello, right? You've all been in this situation where you see the same person, but you don't really know them. And so you don't say hi right away because they're right on your floor, right? You don't want to be too forward, but you don't want to never say hi. When do you make that decision to break the ice and say, hi, how's it going? When does the other person break the ice? Usually, it's a gut decision that's based on experience. I mean, one possibility is after many silent meetings, one person makes a decision to greet the other. What thought process led to the decision? It's possible that the greeter deliberated about it every morning, weighing the cost and benefits, trying to maximize the benefits of saying hello, but probably not. That's probably not what you did. Right? You probably didn't come home and write in your bullet journal every day, saw same man, did not say hi yet, not sure. Maybe you did, but that's probably not what you did. What you probably did was, after a number of, it just felt appropriate. After a number of uneventful, silent encounters, the greeter felt the second person was safe, friendly, and otherwise deserving of the greeting. Put another way, it's probably hard for the greeter to put into words why he or she chose to say hello. It probably just felt right. So all of that stuff that happened, all of those memories for, is this person okay? Is this person okay? You're not necessarily cataloging those explicitly. It's happening incidentally. And eventually you accumulate enough information where you say, this person's okay. How's it going? Hi. Now you're stuck saying hi for the rest of your life, but you felt that it was a good decision to make. And maybe you didn't reason through it with system 2. Maybe it just felt right. So that's the difference in many cases between system 1 and system 2. This catalog of behaviors, memories, and associations, that's kind of the underpinning of system 1 information in this example. There probably wasn't a rational decision. You didn't list all of the times the person was safe and not safe in a spreadsheet. You could have, but your mental spreadsheet is one that feels more intuitive. It's a catalog of behaviors. What are some other examples of system 2 thinking from your experience? So what would be an example of system 2 thinking that would be different from what we talked about as a system 1 example?
Deciding which university you want to go to?
Deciding which university you want to go to for many people is probably a system 2 decision because it's expensive to attend university, often requires a move. What went into your decision to decide to attend Western?
Like a little bit of where my friends are going, the programs here, like stories I've heard from people who I know who went to different schools. Yeah.
So you put together some good stuff and you probably applied to other places. And if you're like many students, you apply to several places and you probably get an acceptance offer from several places. And as you were choosing to go to Western, you probably noticed that Western is like the last place to give the offer of acceptance in many cases. You're kind of waiting. And then you got all this information, like maybe in April or May, and you got to make a decision, right? And that's probably where system 2 is helpful. You don't want to just say, yeah, you know what, I don't care. Queens, he'll do. Maybe you do. So you use a lot of the system 1 information, which is stories from people, but then you probably do put it into some kind of spreadsheet. How many of you actually used a spreadsheet to make pros and cons? Did anybody? It's nothing to be ashamed of. This is exactly what I would do if I were applying to university. I would use a spreadsheet. I tell students whenever I do the open house or when I attend, I've sometimes done the Ontario University Fair as the undergrad chair for this program. I usually give them the advice to, when they're deciding to go to university, go to the best university you can get into that you're going to like being at. It's got the best reputation, it's got the best programs, but it's also a place you're going to fit in well and enjoy being at. And I think for most people, Western fits that bill. That's a great example of system two thinking. So let's finish off this last half of class, about the next 25, 30 minutes, talking about challenges to the thinking process. If you took my 2135 class, I did cover some of this at the end because I think this is good information for everyone. So if you've seen some of this before, there's more stuff. Every year I add more stuff to the section because every year I feel like there are more challenges to my ability to think properly. And there are three that I think are important. One is multitasking, because it's something that we all naturally do. Your brain is designed to multitask. It has to. You've got to process many things simultaneously and then decide what to spend more effort, right? So in order to focus your attention on one thing, you have to multitask to decide what to focus on. That's kind of the paradox of your attention system. I got all this coming in, but I want to pay attention to one thing, but in order to decide what to pay attention to, I still need to rule out all the other stuff. So I'm always switching back and forth, but there's always a cost to switching. Every time you look down at your device, you lose a few seconds of your life. And you lose a little bit of what you were paying attention to. Every time you check a notification on your phone or your watch, you lose a few seconds of your mental life because you need to look, but then you need to reorient yourself to say, what was I supposed to be paying attention to? A few seconds. That's not to say that you're losing a lot. I mean, your brain is designed to do this. There is some recovery, but there's recovery time. That recovery time can add up. So that's what multitasking, for better or worse, is something that we always do. And I'll talk about it within the example of something we're all familiar with, which is using your laptop, your device, or your smartphone in most settings. Another one is incomplete evidence. We never have enough evidence. We often feel like we don't have enough evidence to make a decision, so we make a decision on the evidence we have. Sometimes it's bad. If you're struggling to solve a math problem and you remember the correct algorithm, it's easy. But if you're trying to solve a math problem and you do not remember the steps that you need to take, that's a lot harder, right? And you've probably come into lots of situations like this. How do I do this? Every year I forget how to set up my class because we just switched to Brightspace like 2 years ago. So everything I learned with Owl Sakai is gone. And so I have to remember on a yearly basis, how do I set up a new course? How do I import stuff from the old course into the new course? I haven't made it a habit yet. Why? Because it only happens once a year. I got to set up that course once every year because I'm teaching it the next year and then the next year. So I don't always have the right evidence. I have to look stuff up. We'll talk about that. And then finally, we'll talk about the general idea of brain rot, which is sort of this general sense that most of us have, which is that our brains are kind of rotten from probably what we would like them to be. There's no technical term for brain rot. It can be defined in a lot of ways, but I don't think it's a thing that we would want to dismiss either, because there's a lot of information. Our minds and brains are designed to process lots of information, but there's a limit. Problem with brain rot is that the useless information is proximal. In other words, the things that are not important are at the top. The things that are useful are harder to access. That's when you know brain rot is a problem. So if all you can think about are the things that are kind of useless, that's not good. That means that when you're using system one and you're trying to rely on your memories to solve problems and all you have is a bunch of useless information, you're not solving problems very well. If the stuff that you need to excel in this class, in university, at your job, is harder to access because it's buried underneath all of the useless information, then you're going to struggle. It's going to take longer to look up the stuff that you need. It's going to take you longer to find the information that you need. So we'll talk about all three of these. I mean, this is kind of the standard university experience. It's probably your standard university lecture. If I look out, it's not quite as severe. Some of you have devices that you can write on with a pencil, which I think is great. If I were a student, I would use exactly the same system. I would use a Surface or an iPad and a pencil. And then take notes that way, because I feel like that would be the best of both worlds or something like this. But lots of people, and also myself, use a laptop for the same reason. I take notes on it. I mean, you kind of need a device in this class because sometimes we're interacting. There's QR codes. So most of us are kind of familiar with this. There are some pros and cons, and I'm going to talk about both of them. First of all, how many of you remember when, well, none of you were in university, even all in secondary school when they put the ban in? Or has this happened more recently? I think this happened last year. Ontario banned cell phones from class to absolutely no benefit to anyone because everybody still uses them. They banned them a few years ago and students were allowed to use them for class purposes, which means all the time. This puts a lot of extra pressure on instructors to decide what to do if you're not allowed to have a smartphone. Australia has recently decided to ban social media for students up under the age of 16, I think it is. And again, with very little success because it's really challenging. It's become sort of just part of life, right? I mean, it's part of life to have a device. I can't even log on to my Brightspace page without having to do a multi-factor authentication on my Duo app, which requires a smartphone. So I just can't exist in this society without some kind of device to do something very easily. It doesn't seem to have helped very much. Yes, it helped them focus in class until they got right out of class and then accessed their device and continued to rot their brain. So it's not something that can be handled with a ban, but it is a real thing. So let's talk about some experiments that have measured this. First, I want to talk about an older experiment from 2009, which looked at cognitive control in people that multitask. So they defined a group of people known as media multitaskers. Now, in 2009, this might have seemed a little bit novel, but most of us probably fall into a media multitasker category. If you are the type of person that would have Stranger Things on your laptop while you're studying in the background, you would be a media multitasker. If you listen to music while you're studying, you are a media multitasker. If you have Stranger Things on your laptop and you have several group chats on your phone simultaneously, you are a media multitasker. You're doing 2 or 3 things with media, you're multitasking, right? And it's not difficult to do. Most of us can do it pretty well. The question is, what suffers as a consequence? What about your attention suffers as a consequence? And so what they looked at is they looked at people who were high media multitaskers, people who said, I do this all the time. I'm always watching shows on my laptop, having conversations and studying and listening to music simultaneously. I am a high media multitasker. I like to multitask and I multitask well. High media multitasker. And low media multitasker, people who say, I am not good at multitasking. I don't like to multitask. I like to single task. I am not a media multitasker. And what they found, then what they asked is that they asked them to do some attention tasks. So we got 2 groups of people who multitask, people who don't multitask, self-reported. And then they asked them to do a short-term memory task. Here's the way the trial looked. For 200 milliseconds, you get a orientation cue on the screen. It's just a little plus sign, and it just tells you where to look. Nothing going on yet. Just look here for 200 milliseconds, which is, a little bit less than a quarter of a second. So not much time, but just enough. Then you get a memory array. You've got a series of blue and red bars in different orientations to look at. And your job is to remember after this 100 milliseconds, 1/10 of a second, it just flashes, to remember now for 900 milliseconds where those bars are. So that when you see the next one, you can say same or different. That's a memory task. Is that same or different? In this case, you can see that the red bar is in a different position. And so you would say, no, that is not the same slide. I reject that evidence. You are now showing me a different piece of information. So blue are the same here, but this red one has shifted. So if you did this for enough times, you'd probably get pretty good at it. But you can't do it just by sensory memory because this 900 millisecond delay wipes out your sensory memory. So you've got a little thing to pay attention to, nothing to pay attention to, and now you got something to pay attention to. And there's nothing to multitask. There is no other music, There isn't Stranger Things going on the laptop in the background. You are just doing this task and you're focusing. The question is, how do the multitaskers do? And does it depend on the number of distractors? The blue items here are distractors. If there are a lot of distractors, it gets harder, right? Because there's more things to pay attention to. If there are no distractors, it's easy. If I took away all of the blue and then you saw this and this, you would be able to see that change a little bit more easily. It would be an easier task for you to do. And this performance K shows sort of the difference from an ideal model. So higher is good in this case. And what it shows is that when there are 0 distractors, low and high media multitaskers perform similarly. They perform pretty well. When there's 2 distractors, they're pretty good. But as soon as there are 4 or 6 distractors, the people who are good at multitasking are worse at this task that requires no multitasking. In other words, the people who have trained themselves to be self-reported, I like to do 2 things at once, suffer here when they're supposed to only do one thing. What's one possible explanation? One explanation is that if you're really into multitasking, this is the way you approach life. If you tend to pay attention to lots of things, those distractors are things. You're not supposed to pay attention to them, so you start paying attention to them. So the media multitaskers seem to be more drawn to those distractors. They're more distracted by the distractors. So people who self-report as being media multitaskers, I like to multitask, I'm good at multitasking, maybe are good at multitasking. It's just that multitasking does not help you in this task because you are paying attention to the distractors. You shouldn't be distracted by the distractors. So if you're a person who gets distracted, will do worse in this task when there are more distractors. So this suggests that multitasking might come at a cost. Maybe this is just a correlation. Maybe people who are already a little distracted tend to multitask, and that provides the explanation. So this isn't necessarily a cause and effect. We didn't make a person a multitasker. We just asked them. So in a sense, this is a correlation of the time. It suggests there's a link between these things. Another possibility is that just having a distraction, so if having a distraction on the screen reduces your performance, the natural thing to ask is, what about my device? What if my smartphone is a distractor? If my smartphone is a distractor and I really care about a lot of stuff that's happening in my world, which is reported to me on this device, maybe just seeing it on my desk is kind of like the blue bar. It's enough of a distractor to reduce my performance. Have you found that to be the case in your life? Do you sometimes just think, look, if I see my phone, just seeing it is enough to think, oh wait, what's going on Instagram? Should I check? I just really want to see the next reel. Or whatever it is that sort of draws you to that device. Maybe just seeing it is a bit of a distractor. So that's what this hypothesis was about. Adrian Ward tested whether or not just having a phone on the desk is a distractor. They have 500 students from Northwestern University, North Chicago. And they asked them to do a couple of things. So we'll see on the next slide what the conditions were and what their independent and dependent variables are. But we got a nice sample of 520 people who are smartphone users. In one case, they did the task by leaving their phone and their belongings in the other room. In other words, when they went into the laboratory, they entered one room. The experimenter greeted them and said, leave your bags and your phone here. Kind of like leaving your bag at the front of the room during an exam. Say, put your phone away. Leave it out here and come into the other room and do the task. The second group, called the desk condition, most of their belongings in the lab, but took their phones into the testing room for use in a later study. So bag outside, bring your phone in with you and leave it on the desk. And then another condition was kind of a generic control condition where they said, keep everything with you and just keep your phone wherever you naturally keep it in your pocket, keep it in your pocket. If you carry it around in your hand to leave it on your desk, do that. So this is kind of like whatever you normally do, just do. So we've got leave your phone in the other room, put your phone on the desk, put your phone on the pocket or bag or whatever. However, everybody was told to put their phones on silent. So silence any kind of interrupting notification. Then we gave them some tasks. We gave them an automated operation span task, which is a task that's kind of like the one that we just saw. This is a task where you have to pay attention to things and report on things. In the operation span task, you're simultaneously doing short math problems while you're flashed with letters. And then at the end, you have to remember the letters in the math problem. So it causes you to switch between two different streams of information and then keep things straight. You also do a Raven's progressive matrices task, which is a visual spatial task that also measures fluid intelligence. And then they had some other working memory type of tasks. Performance on the O span assesses domain general attention available to the individual on a moment-to-moment basis. The Raven's progressive matrices task is a measure of understanding and solving novel problems. In other words, fluid intelligence. And this is different from your sort of general knowledge, which might be described as crystallized. Essentially, what they found is that for working memory capacity measured by that O-span task and fluid intelligence, keeping your phone on the desk made you perform worse. So the participants who were asked to do these two tasks while their phone was right in front of them performed less well than participants who put their phone in the other room. And there was sort of an interaction here. Working memory capacity was reduced for the pocket bag condition, but fluid intelligence did not seem to be reduced. Pocket bag condition. So their claim was that just having the phone on the desk was enough of a distraction. Not a big distraction, but here's your score from roughly 30 and a half to almost 34. So it meant that you got a few more items. So this is not a massive difference, but it's a measurable difference. One of my students a few years ago was interested to see if this was a replicable event. Because one of the things we wondered was, okay, you did this task with data that you collected in 2008, when people had a different relationship with their smartphones. How many of you have noticed that younger people, maybe younger than yourselves, use their phones in a different way than older people do? I find that many older people, older than me, are more addicted to their phones than younger people are. And there might be some truth to that, that people who grew up with a smartphone might learn better strategies to avoid it than people who were introduced to their smartphone later in life. Retirees might have a bigger problem with their phones than maybe high school students. It's debatable. Or maybe as you grew up through secondary school and primary school, knowing that sometimes you had to put your device away, that you got better. You learned habits that would allow you to sometimes not be distracted by it. So we thought, would this replicate a few years later? Anna was one of my students. She's now a professor at Ivy. And we found that it does not replicate. We had a large sample. We created the same conditions. And we even looked at whether or not you turned your phone on or off. It makes no difference. For this O-span task, this working memory task, the one that seemed to be a little bit more sensitive, we found no difference. In other words, we found good performance when the phone was on the desk, in the pocket, or outside. We found a small but non-significant effect that people reported to us afterwards, that they did not like being asked to leave their phone in the other room when it was on. They felt a little paranoid leaving their phone in the other room while it was on. And in fact, we measured this in a separate task where we found that people who had a close relationship with their phone, people who identified as being very closely connected to their phone, really did not like leaving it in the other room with us. So that might be a different kind of distraction, where you think, now I'm worried that somebody has my phone and I'm not going to perform very well. So you could very well see a reverse effect. So this does not seem to replicate. Other studies have failed to find this effect to be stable, and other studies have found that it replicates. So it seems to be a small, but possibly not replicable effect. The problem with this is that it seems intuitive, right? Most of us do think our smartphones can be a distraction, even if they may not be a distraction is back. Um, Am I still recording? Oh, I still am recording. How about that? So anybody who's watching on Zoom, I don't know what happened, but the Wi-Fi went out in the room. The lights went off for a bit, the clocks turned off, and it seems like we were disconnected. If you're and I guess when you're watching this video later on, we'll experience a gap, but that's how it is. Where was I? So anyway, you're taking notes. Two kinds of questions, two kinds of multiple choice questions. And one of these are what we would call memory questions, where you just remember stuff. And the others were called application questions. And you probably know this kind of multiple choice question because you take a lot of multiple choice exams. Some things are easy. It's just recalling information. Other things, you've got to sort of apply your information. It's not a direct recall. It's more of, what am I going to do with this information? Basically, they're hard questions. And what they found was that across 3 different studies where they manipulated the interaction with the device, is that people, 2 main findings. Number one, if you were taking notes with a laptop, which is the light, versus taking notes by writing, you tended to write more, significantly more words. So people who type write more than people who write. That's because we type faster than we can write by hand. Almost all of us do. Even slow typists like myself will type faster. It's just easier to sort of do that than it is to make the fluid motions. So most people are fast typists. They write more. They also have more verbatim overlap. And this turns out to be the key to the results later on. You tend to type exactly what you hear. In other words, if you're taking notes with your laptop right now, you might say, has more verbatim overlap, tends to write exactly what you hear. So you record or you transcribe what's being said, mostly because you're going faster. You got the ability to write more, you can type faster, and so you tend to type what you hear. As opposed to people who are writing, well, if you take notes, how many of you take notes almost exclusively with a pen and paper, either digital or otherwise? You write some words, but you might also underline stuff, or maybe you draw a little drawing, or maybe you draw arrows to make connections. So you do things other than just transcribe. You have the ability to do things other than just transcribe. And so what they discovered, and I've got to move over here again to reconnect myself to, there we go, is that on factual questions, which were recall questions, there's really no difference, but on the conceptual questions, the ones where it was a little bit harder, you needed to retain more information and to develop a deeper understanding, performance was better when you took notes by hand. They suggested that somehow writing less, transcribing less, and abstracting more enabled you to do better on these kinds of tasks. They even tried to intervene. They tried to tell people this laptop intervention task was, okay, use a laptop, but don't transcribe. Try to abstract the information. Try to just summarize. Don't transcribe exactly what you hear. But it didn't seem to make a difference. If anything, they found a stronger effect. Something about writing seemed to encourage better memory. There's related research from the University of Waterloo that suggests that drawing can also help you form stronger mental representations. There's a sensory motor interaction that happens when you use a pencil and paper, use a pen and paper, you make drawings and writing, that creates a sort of a multi-sensory representation that typing text doesn't seem to be able to reproduce. So there is some reason to sort of believe this. And in fact, many professors who teach in large universities suggested to their students, look, I'm going to ban laptops from class because you'll retain the information better. That's a little harsh because there's lots of good reasons to have a laptop in class too. One of the things that's great about sort of the multi-media device, that is to say an iPad with a pencil, is you can get the best of both worlds, right? You've got a connected device, you've got the ability to back up your notes digitally, but you can also use a pencil or a pen. Yeah.
Do you know of any studies that have been done looking at like iPad, like digitally writing notes by hand or like paper writing notes by hand?
I don't know of any that have looked at that. There probably are some now. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone has done exactly that study that has tried to look at this without the laptop, but has looked at the iPad version. It should be similar to the kinds of things that you would be able to get with paper and pencil. If you're using the Apple Pencil, the iPad with a pencil, or a Surface Pro with a pencil, you should see a similar effect. And then you get the benefit of having it backed up and available across the budget. There are lots of other reasons that you might want to take notes on a laptop or a device, of course, that you can have access to the slides. And studying in a class is different than taking notes from a single TED Talk and trying to remember stuff. Because if you take notes on your laptop, maybe you don't even understand it quite as well as if you had taken notes paper and pencil, but you're going back. Right, you're looking at your notes again and you're filling in stuff that you missed, and you're looking at the textbook and you're studying with other people. So if there is a small effect, it probably won't affect your performance in a class like this, where you have the opportunity to engage in multiple different ways, maybe typing to take your notes, but also coming back to revisit your notes, filling in your notes. Somebody had a question back there.
I'm just wondering if like the participants were all on the same like intellectual level.
Yeah, these would have been like first-year university students. So pretty much the same group of people are randomly assigned to different groups. And there doesn't seem to be any particular reason why one group would perform better than the other. This seems to be the main intervention. There are some challenges. It isn't a strong effect. And one of the things about a weak effect or a small, I shouldn't call it weak. One of the things about a small effect in psychology is it doesn't always replicate. It doesn't always come out. In fact, there's always the possibility that I ran this study once, and just by chance, I found a significant effect once. And then I did it again and I found a significant effect. But suppose I did it 3 or 4 times and didn't find a significant effect. Which ones am I going to publish? Publish the ones where there's a significant effect and not the ones where there isn't. I might say, I didn't do it right in that second time I did it. So I got to do it again. So now the 3 ones that were published were the first one that was lucky and the 2 that actually showed the same effect. And maybe there were 3 or 4 in there that I ran the experiment and I said, well, I didn't do the manipulation right, or I didn't collect enough data, or I did it at the end of the semester and nobody did really well in this class, or these were the wrong kind of participants. And so what happens is maybe I don't report those results. And it's called the file drawer problem. I put those results in the file drawer and I never look at them. And so we don't know the real answer. One way to do that is a meta-analysis. So this study, which came out a few years later, 10 years later, said don't ditch the laptop just yet. A direct replication of Mueller and Oppenheimer's 2014 study plus many meta-analysis across similar studies. All of these authors ran the same experiment in their labs, different times, different places, and tried to replicate the effects. And they did a direct replication of the Mueller and Oppenheimer study. They did replicate one thing. They replicated the number of words. People who used the laptop wrote more words. This is a different kind of plot, but it shows the distribution of the data, shows the individual data, and it shows the means. But you can see that people who used a laptop wrote more. And people who used a laptop tended to have more overlap. But when they were asked multiple choice questions, whether they were factual or conceptual, there was no difference. So when you get a much bigger sample, maybe this isn't a very stable effect. Again, like the smartphone study, there's an intuitive appeal to this. It kind of feels like typing creates different kind of memory than writing does. And it probably does, but it may not be enough to affect your memory on what you saw in a TED Talk. It may not be a strong enough effect to replicate across many different labs in different times. So if you're taking notes on a laptop, go right ahead, take notes on a laptop. But don't let yourself get distracted. So here across all of these different studies, lots of different attempts to replicate it. The original study is shown here, and you can see that even their effect wasn't super strong. But for the most part, for conceptual replication, here's Mueller and Oppenheimer. Where are they? In their one study, they show this significant effect, but lots of other studies fail to replicate. So the first study was the multi-lab replication, and then here's the meta-analysis of other studies. It just doesn't seem to be a strong enough effect to be worried about. Maybe there's some small effects of memory. But it's very small, and it doesn't replicate across a lot of these labs. However, don't get distracted. Laptop multitasking hinders performance. And what they found in this study from Nick Sapita, who was at McMaster University at the time, is they asked students to essentially intro psych students to participate in a different kind of lecture. I think it was a lecture on meteorology or something like that. And they had two conditions. And this is a lot of text on one screen. So you can read this on the slide, but let me just go cut right to the image. Essentially, what these, they're going to be doing, paying attention or not paying attention. Students who were in the laptop distraction condition were asked to watch a lecture, take notes on their laptop, and then periodically answer questions about what might be on a TV channel or what the weather might be. So in other words, looking stuff up randomly as it floats through your mind. What's going to be on TV tonight? What's the weather going to be like tonight? Should I do something? So if you're just occasionally paying attention in this class, but also a thought pops into your head and you Google it, that would be what this would sort of mimic. And then they gave them multiple choice questions. And after the multiple choice questions, no big surprise, the people who were asked to distract themselves with irrelevant questions didn't learn as much. They performed less well. So if you're using a laptop to take notes and you occasionally distract yourself by looking up stuff to seeing how your stock is doing, or to seeing how what's going on in the world of a lot of international news that you could keep up with, or what's going on in sports. If you're looking up those pieces of information randomly, not relevant, it's going to probably reduce your performance. Here's the interesting thing. They also asked participants to engage in a peer multitasking group. So in one case, here's the person who's being studied, the person on the right. And the person on the left is a Confederate. If you were in the group that could not see a multitasker, you were in the no peer multitasking group. In other words, you were seated next to someone who was also well engaged. But if you were in view of a multitasker, you were seated next to someone who was distracting themselves on their device. And you would also be distracted potentially on their device. And that's what happens. If you view someone who is multitasking, so if you're sitting up here and you're multitasking, the person behind you, their performance could suffer even if they don't want it to. If you're watching funny videos or reels, somebody behind you does not want to see those, it might still affect their performance. So that's my advice here is if you're using a laptop or a device and you want to distract yourself, probably not going to perform as well in this class, and you might be reducing the performance of your peers behind you, which is not a kind thing to do. So keep that in mind. If you want to multitask and distract, back row is the perfect place for that to happen. But the front row would be the less good place for that to happen. Let's talk briefly about incomplete evidence. We've got enough time, I think, to get through all of this. If incomplete evidence, do you use the internet to remember things? Obviously you do. That's how we probably all remember to be here today, is we use the internet to remember what class it was. I used a piece of paper to remember what classroom, but I looked it up on the internet. In fact, we use the internet to remember so many things that it's a distraction. I just got some more notifications. Again, more going on the family group chats. Not relevant to me, but they're small distractions. So yes, most of us not only use the internet to remember things, we actually have to come up with strategies to stop the internet from reminding us about things and turn notifications off for various things that we install. It can get out of hand, right? There can be too many notifications. This just gives me anxiety looking. If you have to register for a course, if you need to switch courses, do you know how to do it? Nobody knows how to do it. You do it by going to the registrar website and you Google, how do I drop a class at Western? And they provide a step-by-step guide because no one would remember these actual steps. All you need to know is where to go, to look for it. And that's how most of us conduct our lives professionally and personally. We don't remember everything. We just remember where to go to find the things that we need to remember, right? That's called cognitive offloading. We've taken what would normally be something that's just memory and offloaded it to something outside your brain. In this case, it's the internet, but there's nothing new about cognitive offloading. You can cognitively offload by writing things down. You can cognitively offload by telling someone and knowing that someone else knows the thing. If you rely on a partner to remember things, then you've offloaded all that responsibility to them, and you can do something else. So cognitive offloading is a human condition. It's not new to the internet. The internet makes it easier and less effortful. You don't even need to remember that. You can just ask Google Gemini how to do it, and it will tell you, hopefully, how to drop a class. A funny story, somebody did remind me that's of someone who used ChatGPT to determine when finals were, or when the break was. And ChatGPT was wrong because it accessed the break from last year. As you know, fall break has changed. So it's not always going to be right. But sometimes if you determine when fall break is going to be by asking Google Gemini or ChatGPT, verify. Trust, but verify, because it could be wrong. Because it's summarizing information from the world, right? So let's examine the psychology of this complicated scenario. Cognitive offloading is the phenomenon of using technology to take on some of what your mind is supposed to do. You engage in cognitive offloading to remember how might it affect your overall behavior. Here's a study from 2016. It's a memory study that looked at cognitive offloading and the tendency to develop habits for cognitive offloading. And what they suggested is the internet functions as a memory partner. Rather than retain information internally, your brain and your mind, we remember where information can be accessed. So we don't remember the facts, we remember the location that those facts are stored. And in many cases, that location is on the internet. We use digital technology as a form of cognitive offload. So if information is going to be available on the computer, then there's less need to commit it to memory. And most of us do that kind of stuff all the time. I Google all sorts of things I already know because that's a faster way to get them than to try to remember. So here's a simple study. We got 60 undergraduates from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and they participated for credit. Average undergraduate student, except it's an average undergraduate at UC Santa Cruz, which means they serve. And they were asked difficult and simple questions. These are trivia questions. This is in the United States. All the trivia was like US history and political science. Easy questions. What is the center of a hurricane called? Everybody knows the answer to that, right? It is the eye of the hurricane. Difficult questions. In what state have the most US presidents been born? Anybody know the answer?
Delaware?
It's Virginia. Delaware's a good guess. Ohio is number 2. Delaware might have 1 or 2, but Virginia, I think, has maybe 6. I don't even know the answer from the US. But anyway, it's not an easy question. Most people don't know. So this is meant to be a hard question. Now, lots of easy questions, lots of hard questions. And we had 3 groups. Group 1 was always use the internet. So answer using, always use the internet in phase 1. Group 2, always use memory. And group 3 is a baseline. In group 3, they did not answer any questions. So group 1, always use the internet to answer these difficult questions. Group 2, always use your memory to answer a difficult question. Group 3, just sit there for a while and don't answer any questions. Does that seem straightforward? That's phase 1. Phase 2, easy questions. Phase 2, it should be easier because the questions are easier. Phase 2, everybody gets the same instructions. Answer from your memory or the internet, whichever you prefer. So what they wanted to know is, if you use the internet on stage 1, would you still use the internet on stage 2, even if you didn't need to? And how could we determine whether or not you didn't need to? We would ask what this baseline group did. They had no experience using either. They're the baseline. They just come into this cold, doing easy questions, use the internet, use your memory, whatever. This gives you sort of a baseline of what the average University Santa Cruz student would do if they're given free rein to use memory or the internet. What proportion of questions so what is the proportion of questions in which participants chose to use Google in phase 2? And the answer is that when you use the internet in phase one, you're significantly more likely to use the internet in phase two. What they suggested is that people developed a habit of Googling things, even when they didn't need to. So the memory group didn't use Google as much. And the baseline group, which never did anything in phase one, just went into phase two cold with a lot of easy questions and the ability to use either, kind of acted like the memory group. In other words, they used their memory when they knew the answer, and they probably used Google when they didn't. The internet users in phase one used the internet probably when they didn't need to. They had developed a habit of cognitive offloading, which carried over to a second task. It gets worse. How much effort does it take? For us, it takes very little effort to search the internet because you can do it from anywhere, right? You're always connected. You're always on. Most of us have multiple devices that we can search the internet with. And so they worked this a couple of years ago, but they tried to manipulate the amount of effort in a physical sense. In one condition, you were seated at the desk in front of a computer. Little effort, right? Because you're right there. In the second condition, you had the sofa computer. You're seated on a nice, comfortable couch, and the computer is over there. So if you need to answer the question, you got to get up off the sofa, walk across the room, and access the internet. That's the second condition, a little bit more effort. Third condition is the sofa iPod touch condition, where in order to use the internet, you had to get up off the comfortable couch, walk across, pick up a painfully tiny iPod touch, and use those painfully small little buttons to search Safari. I'm not even going to bother at that point. I do not need to use the internet because it's too much extra work to use the internet, too much effort. Now this study, and what they found, of course, is that when it took more effort, people were less likely to use the internet. The easier it is, the easier you, more likely you are. You're seated right there, go right ahead and use the internet. If using the internet to answer a question and cognitive offload requires you to get up off the couch, walk across the room, pick up a tiny iPod touch and use those tiny iPod touch buttons to search Safari, you're probably not going to do it because it takes too much time and effort. So let's translate that to the modern era 10 years later. This study was published in 2016. It's now 2026. I got the date wrong because I made these slides last year. So this particular slide. 2026, isn't it? It's 10 years later. The internet is far more accessible and far more evident. Most of us can search the internet without realizing it. Sometimes your phone answers questions when you didn't actually ask it. If you're standing around and you say seriously, your phone starts to answer because it thought you asked the magic Siri what was going on. Sometimes you're on your wrist and you press in and it asks, what do you need? This is much easier to do. So more than likely we're cognitively offloading because it's easier to cognitively offload. And that gets us to this last topic of brain rot, where it's easier and easier to offload things to the internet. And of course, remember that ChatGPT was only made publicly available 3 years ago. Can you remember a time before ChatGPT? You remember doing work when ChatGPT couldn't do it for you. Soon that will be a thing of the past. And your newer cohort of students will not really remember what it was like to not have artificial intelligence. Just like I, as a 56-year-old man, can remember what it was like vaguely before the internet, you'll be able to remember what it was like before artificial intelligence. But kid in grade 6, gets to university, probably will not remember what it was like to not have artificial intelligence there as a companion to do things for them. So it's a very unusual set of circumstances, and it's so much easier. Brain rot means having the useless information at the forefront. I don't need to know what this is, and yet I do. I don't consume any of this content. I have never had a TikTok account. I don't use this, and I still know what these things are. I don't want to know. It's called incidental exposure. When you're exposed to something just through incidental means, you start to learn something. That's a natural way to learn things, isn't it? You learn about identifying people incidentally. You learned about identifying rules of the road. You learn about identifying social interactions incidentally. You don't study them, you just acquire them. So it's easy to acquire this kind of information even without trying. But the problem is if that kind of information is at the surface, and the stuff that you need is buried underneath all of this useless information, then you're going to run into a problem of not having the complete information. So let's talk briefly about it. Brain rot is not a technical term, and there is not much direct literature because the idea of brain rot is still relatively new. The idea that people get distracted from things, not new. The idea that people will not be able to function because they've offloaded too much or they've watched too much TV or listened to too much rock and roll music in the 1950s, not a new idea. But the idea that it's effortless to offload, that's a new idea. It's completely effortless to let artificial intelligence do a lot of thinking for you. So much so that how many of you don't even need to raise your hands, but think about it. How many of you wish you didn't have ChatGPT at the ready all of the time? I sort of do sometimes benefit, but I also think like, man, it's just too easy sometimes. It's just too easy to do that. It's just too easy to take that shortcut. And one of the things you'll learn in this class is that your brain wants to take shortcuts. Your brain is designed to take shortcuts because every time it's hard to think about something, if you need to solve a problem or make a decision that requires a lot of system two, that requires physical energy. It makes you tired. Are you tired after an exam? You're probably tired after an exam because you've been thinking for 3 hours. It's hard to think. It uses physical energy. It uses calories. It uses sugars. You need to replenish that. Your body does not want that. Your body wants to take the easy way most of the time.
Relate to like people who might overthink or overanalyze everything.
People who might overthink or overanalyze might be described as perfectionists or optimizers. And as we'll discuss in a subsequent class, the question is, what about people who overthink, who overanalyze? Well, sometimes that's good. Sometimes it's good to really put a lot of analysis, but sometimes it can lead you to spend too much time. How many of you have, don't need to raise your hands, how many of you have been in situations where you waited too long? You thought too long about the decision. You waited too long to make this decision, and it turned out you missed your chance. You missed your chance because you analyzed it to death. You analyzed it too much. It does happen. If you're the kind of person who is always looking for the optimal, you're always looking to make the best decision, that's called being an optimizer. And those kinds of people who have that approach, chronic optimizers, tend to be less happy because you can't always optimize. And so you're always coming short. But back to this, there isn't much direct literature on brain rot, but we can draw some inferences about what we already know about human cognition. Multitasking. We multitask naturally. Brain and mind do it, but there's always a cost. There's always going to be some cost. Second, we do need useful information to make good information, or useful information to make good decisions. We can't make good decisions without complete, or at least reasonably complete information. If you have the wrong information, you're going to be making the wrong decisions. You will be led down the wrong path. You can be misled by people who are taking advantage of you. You can be misled by let's say, a government or a system or an authority that floods the informational zone with too much to process at once. And then you don't pay attention to what matters because lots of other stuff is distracting. It's headlines. We also tend to offload to external sources. Again, this is perfectly natural. Your brain and mind like to offload because that saves energy. And memory is prone to effects like recency effects, where you remember the thing that happened most recently. And if you're asked about something, you're going to remember something that happened yesterday versus something that happened 3 years ago. So you remember recent information. And you also are prone to availability effects, which we're going to talk about in a few lectures in the future. But an availability effect is when you base a decision or solve a problem based on what is most easily comes to mind, the information that's easy to recall. Your cognitive system makes the assumption that if I can recall something easily, it might be the right answer. The right answer should be easy to recall. What happens if the wrong answer is easy to recall? You will make a mistake. because you'll base your decision on the wrong information. If the wrong information is proximal, your decisions are not going to be the best decisions. So that's probably what would be the mechanism behind a brain rot idea. Again, it's not a, I just had that slide. I'm going backwards. So psychologists did warn about this a few years ago. Here's a study from 2016, where the authors say, while the literature is still sparse and is marked by convergent and divergent findings, the balance of evidence suggests that heavy multitaskers exhibit poorer performance on a number of cognitive domains relative to lighter multitaskers. So there does seem to be a suggestion that the more you spread, the more difficult it is to perform. There have also been lots of accounts in the popular media. Here is a study. Here's a paper that was in The Guardian, which you can link to, but I'll just put a couple of, let me hide things. I put meeting controls. This is an article by Johan Hari that appeared in the Guardian UK. I'll highlight a little bit of this with the small caveat that Hari was later accused of plagiarism on other sources. Plagiarism by scientific and popular science journalisms is kind of their version of a bad heuristic, where they're under pressure to perform and write interesting articles, and then they make stuff up. So this is not new. So although this particular article makes some points that are interesting, I just want to acknowledge that the author has also come under fire for misrepresenting some sources, like many other authors have in this domain. The world of being a idea influencer / podcaster / popular media journalist is a lucrative one, and a temptation to fake, fortunately. I gotta go back here. This is a good article, despite the fact that I just completely trashed the author. That doesn't mean that everything the author has written is bad. So he talks about his a child he knows who I think might be like a cousin or something like that. Name is changed. Adam was lost. He was a good child, so he's really interested in travel. This 10 years later, Adam was lost, dropped out of school when he was 15, spent almost all his waking hours alternately staring blankly between screens, a blur of YouTube, WhatsApp, and porn. I've changed his name to some minor details to preserve his privacy. He seemed to be whirring at the speed of Snapchat, and nothing still or seriously gained any traction in his mind. During the decade in which Adam had become a man, this fracturing seemed to be happening to many of us. Our ability to pay attention was cracking and breaking. I had just turned 40, and wherever my generation gathered, we would lament our lost capacity for concentration. This is not something that is new. And one of the reasons, and this is why I think it's an interesting article, it's called the switch cost effect. It means that if you check your text while trying to work, you aren't only losing the little burst of time you spend looking at the text, you are losing the time it takes to refocus afterwards, which turns out to be a huge amount. One study at Carnegie Mellon took 136 students and sit from a test. Some of them had their phones switched off, others had their phones on and received text messages. Students who received messages performed 20% worse. So not just having a smartphone there, but getting notifications. There's always going to be some cost. And it's that refocus cost. It's the switch cost that seems to be the real battle. It's not just 3 seconds looking. It's the 10 seconds that it takes you to get your focus back. There are some problems. How many of you turn all your notifications off? Almost everybody does, right? Unless you need to have them on. I forgot. And so I got a couple of very light pulse notifications for some group chats, which are the only thing that are allowed in our family member group chats. Because obviously, who else would I care about? I don't need to know from anybody else. I just need a few things. So most of us learn to turn the notifications off. How many of you turn notifications off, turn the badges off on the apps on your screen, and still check anyway? Because the signal is coming inside your brain. You've internalized the notification. That's how bad it is. You don't even need the notification anymore. You've actually made the notification inside. And that means it's a stronger notification and a harder habit to break. It's one thing to turn off something and to be distracted by a ping on your phone, but it's another when the ping comes inside your brain. Once you've learned to make that ping yourself, it's going to be a lot harder to extinguish the ping, because how are you going to turn it off? It's already there. That's what this switch cost is all about. You have the notification in your brain. And so you just sit and look at your phone. And I don't mean you personally, I mean one. One sits and looks at their phone and says, I haven't seen anything come up. I wonder if there's anything on here. Oh, yeah, look, there's something. That's exactly what I mean. You've now made an internal ping, and that's really hard to get rid of. We got a few minutes left, and I'll leave you with some hope. Is this a real phenomenon? I mean, the question kind of answers itself. Do you struggle to complete an email? I struggle to complete emails. When you write a message, complete an assignment, take a short mental task. Is it hard to finish a task because you got too much going on? For most of us, it is. So I do want to say it's important not to draw too many conclusions, because this is incomplete. I've just painted a really bad case scenario, but it's something that humans have been dealing with for as long as we've been humans, right? We've always had to deal with things that compete for our attention. So here's a quick summary, and don't go just yet, because I want to sort of give you a quick highlight for what's coming next and how to ask questions. The summary is we want to talk about what thinking is and how it relates to cognition. What are some challenges to the thinking process? Some of those things that had bold reproductive thinking and heuristics, anything that's bolded, perfect multiple choice question, right? Anytime I list 3 theories, that sounds like a perfect multiple choice question or a perfect short answer question, where I might say, what are 3 approaches to study thinking? And you would then list Gestalt, cognitive, dual process. What are some theories and approaches? So that's a heuristic that you might use: bold, great short, great multiple choice, lists of different theories, 3 or 4 theories, great short answer questions you have to study for. So at the end of every class, what I'll give you is a QR code and a link, and this is the foggiest concepts. You don't need to do this now, but you can if it's still foggy in your mind. Take a picture and complete it later. But the slide also has the link to the same survey. If there's something you'd like me to explain again in more detail, if there's something that you didn't quite understand, and if enough people identify it, I'll talk about it a little bit at the beginning of the lesson. If there's something that you really didn't understand and you're the only person who didn't, you can always reach out to me if I didn't cover it again sufficiently, and I can certainly walk you through it. Okay, we finished up almost exactly on time. It's 12:18. I will see you all next week, and we'll talk about similarity.
He's not gonna take it done.
Stop this recording.
I don't think it's wrong.
Yeah, they
Awesome. Stop recording.
I swear,
You guys, so just gonna wait up.
Sure.